Highways, stretches of asphalt where countless journeys begin and end. But what if some of those journeys never truly end? Tonight, we bring you 3 disturbing tales of ghostly encounters on America's highways. Stories so chilling, they'll make you think twice before taking that late-night drive. Lock your doors, keep your lights on, and prepare for the unknown. Welcome to tonight's haunting journey. 1. The Vanishing Hitchhiker of Route 66. Route 66, known for its nostalgic charm, holds an eerie reputation for those traveling its desolate stretches under the pale moonlight. For John Riley, a veteran truck driver, one late-night trip turned into a story he wishes he could forget. It was a chilly October night, and John was hauling cargo across Arizona. The desert air was crisp, and the road ahead stretched endlessly into the horizon, illuminated only by his truck's headlights. He tuned the radio to a static-filled station, hoping to drown out the loneliness of the empty highway. Suddenly, his beams caught a figure standing on the shoulder of the road, a young woman waving desperately for help. John hesitated. Picking up hitchhikers was against company policy, and he wasn't one to take risks. But something about the woman's frantic waving compelled him to stop. He pulled over and rolled down the window. "You need help?" he asked, eyeing her cautiously. The woman, no older than 20, nodded quickly. "My car broke down a few miles back," she said, her voice trembling. She was wearing a pale blue dress that seemed out of place for the cold night. Against his better judgment, John unlocked the passenger door. "Hop in. Where are you headed?" "Kingman," she replied softly, climbing into the seat. She clutched a small handbag, her fingers trembling. The ride started in silence, broken only by the hum of the truck's engine. John tried to make conversation. "So, what were you doing out there alone this late?" The woman didn't meet his gaze, staring blankly out the window instead. "Just trying to get home," she murmured. John shrugged off her odd demeanor, attributing it to the stress of being stranded. As the miles passed, he noticed a strange chill in the cab. Despite the heater being on, it felt as though the temperature had dropped. The unease deepened when John glanced at the passenger seat during a lull in the road. She was gone. His heart pounded as he swerved the truck to the shoulder, bringing it to a screeching halt. The seatbelt dangled loosely, and the door was still locked. He jumped out and circled the truck, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. There was no sign of her. Shaken, he decided to drive to the address she had given. When he arrived, he found an old, weathered house. An elderly woman answered the door, her expression wary. John explained what had happened, describing the young woman. The old woman's face turned pale, and she leaned against the door frame. "You're talking about my daughter, Lila," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But she died 20 years ago, on Route 66. Her car broke down, and she was hit by a truck while trying to flag someone down." John froze, his breath hitching. The woman disappeared into the house and returned with a faded photograph. The young woman in the picture was unmistakable. It was Lila. He left the house in a daze, vowing never to take that stretch of Route 66 again. To this day, he swears he can still feel the icy chill of her presence in the truck. The restless passenger of Interstate 90. Interstate 90 is a vast stretch of highway that connects the bustling cities of the United States. winding through isolated plains and shadowy forests. Late at night, the road seems to lose its life, becoming a desolate path where silence and shadows reign supreme. For Amy Clark, a dedicated nurse working double shifts Interstate 90, was a familiar route home. But one fateful night, her routine drive turned into a harrowing encounter she would never forget. It was nearly 1:15 a.m. when Amy finally clocked out of the hospital. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her, but the thought of her cozy apartment just an hour away kept her motivated. She started her car, cranked up the heater to combat the chilly November air, and pulled onto the highway. The road stretched endlessly ahead, illuminated by her headlights. She turned on the radio, but static filled the airwaves. With a sigh, she switched it off, letting the hum of her tires against the asphalt provide a rhythmic background. As the minutes passed, Amy began to feel the tug of drowsiness. She rolled down her window slightly, letting the cool air snap her awake. Suddenly, in the distance, a figure appeared under a flickering streetlight on the side of the road. Amy's heart skipped a beat. The figure, a man, was standing perfectly still, his thumb raised in the universal gesture for a ride. Her first instinct was to keep driving. Picking up strangers was risky, especially on an isolated stretch of highway. But as she passed him, a pang of guilt struck her. The man looked desperate, his clothes torn, and his face shadowed by the flickering light. Amy slowed down and pulled over a few feet ahead. She rolled down the passenger side window but kept the doors locked. "Are you okay?" she called out. The man approached, his movements slow and deliberate. His face was pale, almost unnaturally so, and his eyes were sunken, like he hadn't slept in days. "Please," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "I need a ride. Just up the road." Amy hesitated. Something about him felt off, but the nurse in her couldn't leave him stranded. After a moment's pause, she unlocked the door. "All right, get in," she said, trying to mask her unease. The man climbed into the back seat without a word. Amy glanced at him through the rearview mirror. He was hunched over, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Where exactly are you headed?" she asked, her voice breaking the heavy silence. "Just a little further," he muttered, his gaze fixed on the floor. The ride continued in tense silence. Amy tried to make conversation, asking where he was from and what had happened to him, but his answers were brief and evasive. As the miles rolled by, an oppressive chill settled in the car. Amy adjusted the heater, but it didn't help. The air felt heavy, like an invisible weight pressing down on her. She stole another glance at the man through the mirror. This time, his eyes met hers, and she felt a jolt of fear. His gaze was intense, almost inhuman, and his pupils seemed unnaturally large. Amy's grip on the steering wheel tightened. The unease grew when she noticed a strange smell, a damp, earthy odor that filled the car. It reminded her of wet soil, the kind you'd find in a freshly dug grave. "You missed the turn," the man said suddenly, his voice sharper than before. Amy's heart leapt. "What turn?" she asked, glancing around. There hadn't been any turn-offs for miles. "The one back there," he replied, his tone cold and accusatory. Amy looked in the rearview mirror again, but the back seat was empty. Her breath caught in her throat as she slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop, and she whipped around to look at the back seat. It was completely empty, but the seatbelt was still buckled as if someone had just been sitting there. Her mind raced. Had she imagined the entire thing? Was she so tired that she was hallucinating? Before she could gather her thoughts, a loud thud came from the roof of the car. Amy froze, her pulse pounding in her ears. Another thud followed, then a scraping sound, as if something, or someone, was crawling across the roof. Panic set in. Amy threw the car into gear and sped down the highway, her hands shaking on the wheel. The thudding and scraping continued, growing louder and more frantic. She screamed as the roof buckled slightly, the metal groaning under the weight of whatever was up there. In the distance, she saw the lights of a gas station. Desperation propelled her forward, and she skidded into the parking lot, stopping inches from the entrance. The noise stopped abruptly. Gasping for air, Amy scrambled out of the car and ran inside. The clerk, a young man scrolling through his phone, looked up in surprise. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked. "There's something on my car," Amy stammered, pointing to her vehicle. The clerk grabbed a flashlight and followed her outside. They circled the car, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. However, deep scratches ran across the roof, and the backseat window was fogged up, as if someone had been breathing on it. Amy told the clerk about the man she had picked up, and his expression darkened. "You're not the first person to say that," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" Amy demanded. "There's a local legend," he explained. "Years ago, a hitchhiker was killed on this highway. People say his spirit still wanders trying to get home, but he never makes it." Amy felt a chill run down her spine. She thanked the clerk and left the gas station, her nerves still frayed. To this day, she avoids Interstate 90 at night. The scratches on her car eventually faded, but the memory of that restless passenger and the eerie events that followed remains etched in her mind forever. 3. The ghost truck of Dead Man's Pass. Dead Man's Pass in Oregon is notorious for its dangerous curves and chilling folklore. Charlie Morales, a traveling salesman, had always dismissed the ghost stories as local superstition. But one foggy night, he discovered the truth. Charlie was driving through the pass late at night, the fog so thick it swallowed his headlights. The road was eerily quiet, the only sound the hum of his engine. As he navigated a sharp turn, his heart stopped. A massive semi-truck, its headlights blindingly bright, barreled toward him in the wrong lane. Charlie swerved off the road, narrowly avoiding a collision. Shaking, he pulled over to catch his breath. The truck had vanished as suddenly as it appeared. Charlie continued driving, his nerves on edge. A few miles later, his rearview mirror filled with blinding lights. The same truck was now behind him, its horn blaring. He pressed the gas pedal, speeding through the winding road, but the truck stayed close, its headlights impossibly bright. The horn's deafening roar made it hard to think. Desperate, Charlie took the next exit, pulling into a rest stop. The truck followed, but as he parked, it disappeared into the fog. The next morning, Charlie inspected his car. Deep scorch marks lined his rear bumper as if something otherworldly had been inches away from consuming him. Locals later told him the legend. A truck driver had lost control on the pass decades ago, crashing into the ravine and dying on impact. Since then, his ghostly semi was said to haunt the road, chasing drivers who dared to travel it at night. And that concludes our journey down the haunted highways of America. Which story sent shivers down your spine? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And remember, these roads hold secrets that may never rest. If you want more terrifying tales like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a haunting moment. Until next time, stay safe and watch your rearview mirror.